That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It is the first human footstep on the moon, and the world is forever changed.
Fantastic feeling. It was one of great accomplishment.
It was almost miraculous.
We did it for all the right reasons. We did come in peace for all mankind.
On July 20th, 1969, as the lunar dust compresses beneath the boot of astronaut Neil Armstrong, NASA's Apollo project scores a bullseye. Until the fall of 1957, the moon is Earth's only satellite, orbiting for eons in silent vigil. That October, the hush of space and America's sense of security is shattered by Sputnik. The sound of the Soviet satellite becomes eerily familiar to Americans. Fears escalate that the Cold War could heat up with catastrophic effect.
Immediately everyone thought, well, they're now able to really send their military machines around the world up above. Who is not going to be in danger?
President Eisenhower combined several agencies working on rocketry and flight to create one civilian agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Over the next years, the United States successfully launches satellites with great scientific payback. To prepare for human flight, several animals, including a chimpanzee named Ham, survived the ride to space and back. But once again, these American accomplishments are eclipsed by the Soviet space machine. April 12, 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becomes the first human in space. To temper this latest Soviet triumph, the U.S. needs to put its own man in space. That man is astronaut Alan Shepard.
1.2 G.
Shepard's flight had tremendous impact. I think it was the leading technological accomplishment of that era, and led to the whole future of the exploration to the moon.
Unlike Gagarin's 108-minute orbit of Earth, Shepard's suborbital flight, the nation's lone human venture into space, lasts just 15 minutes. Nonetheless, President Kennedy goes before Congress and lays down the gauntlet.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The combination of the Gagarin flight and the Bay of Pigs disaster with Cuba, I think, pushed Kennedy towards something that would be positive and would show that we were ahead of the Soviet Union.
President Kennedy's interest in space moves beyond just beating the Soviets. As his passion grows, so does his rhetoric.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It will take an all-out effort by thousands of dedicated Americans to design and build the machines and methodologies needed to succeed, one small step at a time.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
February 20th, 1962. John Glenn circumnavigates the Earth 3 times.
The single most important factor was that man could survive and perform as well at 0 gravity as he could at 1 G.
0 G, and I feel fine.
By May 1963, the U.S. Mercury program flies 6 manned flights. But the last, Gordon Cooper's 34-hour solo mission, still leaves the moon out of America's reach. The Gemini program is the next step. Its larger capsule carries 2 astronauts. Mercury veteran Gus Grissom flies with John Young aboard Gemini 3, the program's first manned flight. On Gemini 4, Ed White opens the hatch and steps out into the void as America's first spacewalker.
I feel like $1 million. I will pick up.
Extravehicular activity, EVA, in NASA speak, is critical to a moon mission.
Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Engine start.
So too is the ability of 2 spacecraft to meet up or rendezvous in space. It happens on Jim Lovell's first flight.
The first rendezvous, Gemini 6 with Gemini 7, I think was a magnificent milestone in the quest to go to the moon, because we had to determine the types of rendezvous that we want to do around the moon, and we first had it just about around the Earth.
By Gemini's 12th and final mission, rendezvous and docking are well practiced.
Gemini 12, Houston, Capcom, 1 minute to LOS. New EVA record, beautiful job.
NASA is now ready to shoot for the moon. But there are just 3 years left to meet President Kennedy's goal, and no one really knows how close the highly secretive Soviets are. And of the moon itself, little is known.
Could be dust up to 25, 30 feet thick. If you landed on it, you would sink into the moon. If you landed on it and set out some fire from the rockets, exhaust, it would cause this huge inferno on the lunar surface. What were the radiation problems on the moon from the sun? What were the thermal conditions you had to deal with on the lunar surface?
Getting answers falls to a series of robotic spacecraft. In mid-1966, Surveyor 1 lands on the lunar surface. The 11,000 photos it sends back help to dispel fear and clear the way for the Apollo moon landing program. 2 short months after the final Gemini flight, astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are posing for photos and spending hours in simulators as they prepare for the first Apollo mission less than a month away. January 27, 1967. The crew is in the capsule, mounted atop an unfueled Saturn 1B for a dress rehearsal of the countdown sequence.
How are we going to get the moon? We can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings.
A series of problems has already raised tensions at the launch pad. When 5.5 hours into the test, Ed White's shouts are heard.
I was going far in the cold strip.
At that point, things progressed with absolutely stunning speed. I mean, it was only a matter of 20 seconds before the crew was unconscious. Moments later, the pressure from the fire had increased to the point where it literally ruptured the hull of the spacecraft. Toxic smoke spewed into the White Room. The technicians were struggling to get the hatch open.
Heroes' burials. Apollo, like another mythological figure, Phoenix, begins its rise from the ashes. Following recommendations of an accident review board, the Apollo command module is redesigned and rewired for safety, all under the wary eye of the astronauts who will fly it. 20 months later, from the same pad Apollo 1 had occupied, Apollo 7 roars off for an 11-day shakedown in Earth orbit.
We inherited the first manned Apollo mission, which turned out to be Apollo 7. But as with many things with NASA, what was a disaster with Apollo 1 turned out to be a real triumph with Apollo 7 because the spacecraft itself was a marvelous flying machine.
It's also the first time live television shows Earth-bound humans what it's like to be in space.
It says from that lovely Apollo something. You guys should write
Apollo room. High atop everything. High atop everything.
Apollo 7's success restores some swagger to America's space program. But there are reports the Soviets may be closing in on the moon.
The original plan was for Apollo 8 to be an Earth orbit test, but the lunar module wasn't ready. And so the decision was made to actually do a circumnavigation of the moon. So that's what actually happened in December of 1968.
The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Commander Frank Borman, veteran astronaut Jim Lovell, and rookie Bill Anders are the first humans to ride the Saturn V's 7.5 million pounds of thrust.
We were way up on the top, like a ladybug on the end of your automobile's whip antenna. So as these big engines were thrashing around to keep this thing straight up, boy, the ladybug was getting thrashed. And it was so loud we couldn't talk. The vibration, the thrashing was violent, and you couldn't see the instrument panel. But when we cleared the pad and had some aerodynamic stability and didn't have this noise, boy, things steadied out, and by that time my heart stopped racing.
Apollo 8 is the first time humans venture beyond Earth's gravity. Lovell marvels at never-seen-before sights.
I can see the entire Earth now out of the center window. I can see Florida, Cuba, Central America.
Christmas Eve Day, 1968. With the moon dwarfing the nearing spacecraft, Commander Borman fires the main engine on the Apollo service module. The craft slows, then slides into orbit around the moon. The world watches in awe, but none more so than the three men peering out the tiny windows of their capsule.
We were the first three people to leave the confines of the Earth and be captured by another body. First time three people saw the far side of the moon. First time that we had gone so far, and the first time that we saw the Earth from 240,000 miles away. So in that respect, I kind of thought that Apollo 8 was really a milestone and a high point in my career.
The vast loneliness up here on the moon is awe-inspiring, and it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth. The Earth from here is a grand oasis in the big vastness of space.
As the moon's pockmarked surface slips quietly by, the Apollo 8 crew ends its Christmas Eve broadcast with a special message for those back home.
And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth.
For all its success, Apollo 8 is missing one key component for a moon landing. The lunar module, still being built, is overweight and behind schedule.
It's not a simple thing. Spacecraft never landed on another celestial body, so the design had to be done from scratch. One of the main things you had to figure out was that you had to have a rocket on the ascent stage especially that you had to be 100% sure would work, because you didn't want the two astronauts sitting on the lunar surface and the rocket didn't work.
The first LEM is ready for testing in Earth orbit on Apollo 9. The LEM is put through its paces and proves it's ready to go to the moon. With one significant limitation. Still too heavy, the LEM can't land. So Apollo 10, like Apollo 8 before it, will only orbit the moon and test rendezvous the lander with the command module.
This is really a rugged planet.
As John Young watches from his command module, Charlie Brown, Commander Tom Stafford and LEM pilot Gene Cernan undock Snoopy, their lander that can't.
And I was doing backup maneuvers to the attitudes, and if they couldn't do the maneuvers, I would do the maneuvers and hopefully rescue them. But I was always ready in case their vehicle blew up or something to come back without them.
To test a landing approach, the LEM drops to within 9 miles of the moon's surface and gets a good look at the site NASA has selected for the first touchdown. Skimming the surface at nearly 3,700 miles an hour, Cernan peers out his window at lunar mountains.
We is down among them, Charlie. Roger, I hear you weaving your way up the freeway.
Roger, fantastic, Charlie, fantastic.
I felt like I had to pick up my feet to keep from dragging my heels on the top of those mountains. When you move that fast across the surface and you're that close, it's an overpowering experience.
On their second flyover, the experience turns almost deadly when the lunar module tumbles out of control.
I saw the lunar horizon 8 times in 15 seconds in all different directions. That was a man-made problem because we were switching computers to check out a little backup computer we had. The guidance switch had to go in the other direction. I had already put it in the other direction. And so Tom went and moved it in the other direction. And so the computer that had the spacecraft at that moment didn't know where it was. But Tom was able to stop it, control it.
Finally, as in the comics, Snoopy returns to his master, Charlie Brown. Even before Apollo 10 enters lunar orbit, the Apollo 11 spacecraft has been rolled out to the launch pad atop its Saturn V rocket. In less than 2 months, its crew will try and safely set it down on the moon.
That's one small step for man.
I was in the student houses at Caltech, and we were watching the TV and all the excitement about, landing on another celestial object. And I had no idea that one day I'll become the director of JPL. But reflecting back on it, I mean, that was really something I remember forever.
One giant leap for mankind.
They've all been to space before. Commander Neil Armstrong on Gemini 8. Command Module Pilot Michael Collins on Gemini 10. Lunar Module Pilot Buzz Aldrin set an EVA record on the final Gemini flight. The morning of July 16, 1969, spectators line the beaches around the Kennedy Space Center. America will attempt to end the space race. Moon fever is rampant.
And there was just great excitement, and you could hear lots of people saying, gosh, this is almost, I can't believe that somebody's going to go to the moon.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6.
At 9:32 a.m., the Saturn V's giant engines roar to life. At the viewing stand 3 miles away, spectators feel the thunderous drumbeat of unearthly power pounding their chests as the heat of the rocket's exhaust washes over them.
When that rumble came across the ground, it was like somebody was putting their hands on your chest and pressing. I almost couldn't breathe. It was so unbelievable that the United States was going to send 2 men to walk on the surface of the moon. It was almost unthinkable.
For 3 days, the crew of Apollo 11 cruises towards the moon, then drops its spacecraft into lunar orbit.
I just thought there were so many unknowns that I would have given us about a 50-50 chance of being the first flight to land and return someone safely.
With Collins remaining in the command module, Armstrong and Aldrin prepare the LEM and themselves to become the first humans on the moon.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro. Go. Fido. Go. Guidance. Go. Control. And Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Ecom. Go. Surgeon. Go. Capcom, we're go for landing. Eagle, Houston, you're go for landing. Over.
But the landing veers from the planned script. As the LEM nears the surface, the onboard computer flashes an alarm the crew doesn't recognize.
1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm.
Any one of thousands of technical glitches could abort the landing. But Houston quickly diagnoses the problem as non-critical, an overloaded computer.
1201 alarm. Same type, we're go, flight. Okay, we're go. Same type, we're go.
That's when real trouble threatens the mission.
540 feet down at 30 and at 15.
As the LEM pitches upright about a mile above the moon's surface, Armstrong gets his first look at where computers will set them down. A field of boulders, any one of which could prove deadly. Armstrong wraps his hand around the joystick and takes manual control.
3.5 down, 220 feet. 13 forward.
With fuel running out, Armstrong flies the LEM like a helicopter. Aldrin keeps his eye on their altitude, forward speed, and rate of descent, calling out the numbers.
100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward.
At 60 seconds, we're still 100 feet up. I was nervous. Okay, at 30 seconds, we were 10 feet. I figured we had it made. But 100 feet, we're thereabouts at 60 seconds, you could very easily just not be where you want to be.
4 forward, drift into the right level.
Sort of like driving your car when the gas gauge is reading empty, but you know that when it gets down there, you got a few more miles left. Well, that was the situation we faced. And I think it was in the last seconds. Everybody was holding their breath. It was pretty dicey.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop. APA at a descent. Mode control both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in.
We've had shutdown. We copy you down, Eagle. Okay, everybody, T1. Stand by for T1.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Man on the moon. Ooh. Oh, boy.
Thank you.
You're looking good here.
Boy.
Wait, we're going to be busy for a minute.
Like people around the world, of every persuasion and from every walk of life, mission controllers in Houston are overwhelmed.
Okay, keep the chatter down in this room.
Now, in the control room, we had work to do because we had to very rapidly look at the spacecraft systems and give the crew a stay-no-stay decision that everything was safe to remain in the moon, and we had to accomplish that within the first 2 minutes.
Okay, T1, stay-no-stay, retro. Stay. Fido. Stay. Guidance. Stay. Control. Stay. Telcom. Stay. GNC. Stay. Ecom. Stay. Surgeon. Stay. Capcom, we're stay for T1.
So basically, we had to keep our emotions in check and keep the chatter down for the first 2 hours after landing while everybody in the entire world was celebrating.
And we're getting a picture on the TV. You had a good picture, huh?
It's distorted, flickering, and at first, upside down. But a small black and white television camera mounted outside the LEM gives the world its first live glimpse of an alien landscape. No one is more interested in seeing that first picture than the man responsible for bringing it to everyone's TV.
This whole mission was now about television, in my mind. There were hundreds of millions of people watching, waiting to see the first step on the moon and people on the moon, see a spacecraft on the moon, anything. And if it doesn't work, then probably people actually will know my name years from now as the guy who didn't bring you television from the moon.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
The world just marveled at this right along with us, and we more or less made the whole world our partners in this thing by inviting people to be there during the launches. And I think that's one of the best things we ever did in the space program. One of the best decisions ever made with regard to the space program was to share that with the world.
Okay, I just checked getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up.
More than 500 million people around the globe watch as Armstrong first makes sure he can get back into the LEM, then gives the first eyewitness account from the lunar surface.
The surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
6.5 hours after landing on the Sea of Tranquility, Neil Armstrong steps off the footpad of the lunar lander and ends the race to the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
For 2 hours and 31 minutes, Armstrong and Aldrin share their observations.
The surface is fine and powdery. I can pick it up loosely with my toe. There seems to be no difficulty in moving around as we suspected. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here. Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.
Aldrin says magnificent, but thinks otherwise.
What a desolate place we just landed on. Absolutely no life, no color, really, until you get down and look at the minerals in the rocks, because everything's covered with this little dust.
They are the only two beings here, but Armstrong and Aldrin have come for all humanity.
Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. It came in peace for all mankind. The primary and secondary struts are in good shape.
With future moon landings dependent upon its integrity, the LEM is examined closely.
Antennas are all in place. There's no evidence of problem underneath the LEM due to either the engine exhaust or drainage of any kind.
What little science this mission has time for is conducted with a seismometer. A core sampling is taken.
I hope you're watching how hard I have to hit this into the ground to the tune of about 5 inches, Houston.
No trip is complete without souvenirs. Commander Armstrong tallies up their take of moon rocks for study back on Earth.
And we got about, I'd say, 20 pounds of carefully selected, if not documented, samples.
Houston, Roger, well done out.
As Armstrong and Aldrin study the moon, controllers in Houston watch closely over them. Their life-sustaining suits have limited supplies of oxygen and power, and they're reaching their safety margins.
Buzz, this is Houston. It's about time for you to start your EVA closeout activities.
Roger.
19 minutes later, the first moonwalk is over.
Okay, the hatch is closed and latched.
As the ascent stage of the Eagle takes flight and Tranquility Base recedes beneath it, the magnitude of the accomplishment begins to sink in for Chris Kraft.
In terms of technology, in terms of advancement of the state of the art in science and technology, it was probably the most productive 10 years in the history of man. And when you reflect back on it, it probably was even greater than I could comprehend today.
With a scant 5 months to spare, NASA has met President Kennedy's goal. America has gained preeminence in human spaceflight. Yet it's only the beginning. Lunar exploration and science are Apollo's new mission. and the program will land 10 more men on the moon to fulfill it.
That's one small step for man.
We're in the viewing room at the Mission Control Center in Houston, watching the terminal phase of that flight and the landing itself on the moon. I was telling Neil not to land because we were next. But he did a great job.
One giant leap for mankind.
And at launch weighs more than 6 million pounds. Its 3 stages generate nearly 9 million pounds of thrust. It is the largest rocket ever flown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running. Commit. Liftoff.
When Apollo 12 leaves Pad 39A on the second moon landing mission, the Saturn V proves its mettle. 36 seconds after lifting off in a rainstorm, lightning hits the rocket and waylays the crew's control panel.
I don't know what happened here. We had everything in the world drop out. I'm not sure we can get hit by lightning.
16 seconds later, as if to confirm Commander Pete Conrad's theory, a second lightning bolt strikes the rocket. Command Module pilot Dick Gordon watches his entire electrical system shut down.
The moment of the lightning strike, the reverse current relays did their job and shut down the fuel cells. So we were not receiving any electrical power from the fuel cells, which was our main source of electrical energy. Fortunately, at that time, the batteries were on the line for the launch itself, so we had electrical power, and that really saved us from automatic abort.
13 Saturn V rockets fly during Apollo, including every moon mission. Although anomalies occur, no Saturn V ever fails.
I think I see my crater. Hey, baby. I'm not sure.
Including Apollo 12's.
There it is! Son of a gun! Right down the middle of the road!
A major goal of the mission is to execute a pinpoint landing in an area called the Ocean of Storms.
So NASA said, we're going to demonstrate this by picking a certain crater, and then we'll send you there. And the crater we're going to pick is the one that has Surveyor 3 in, that landed inside this crater some 33 months earlier.
Man, that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me.
And we landed, and the first thing Pete did when he got out was go around and looked and see if Surveyor was in that crater.
Boy, you'll never believe it. Guess what I see sitting on the side of the crater? The old Surveyor, huh? The old Surveyor, yes, sir. Does that look neat? It can't be any further than 600 feet from here. We have a good shot of you there, Pete.
Live television from the moon is now in color.
Okay, Houston, I'm going to move the TV camera now.
But the achievement is short-lived when Alan Bean accidentally points the camera at the sun and burns out its video tube.
Pete and I didn't know that, and so when it burns out, we're standing around not knowing why. Now, the people on the ground knew immediately why, but they never told us. They never said, you pointed it at the sun, it's ruined forever.
Al, we have a pretty bright image on that TV. Could you either move it or stop it down? That's as far as it goes, Houston. How does that look to you? No, it still is the same, Al.
Big disappointment to all of us and everyone on Earth. Someone told me one day, they said, there's one thing good about it that came out of it. We used to have discussions that maybe we shouldn't have a TV. They said, after your mission, never had that discussion anymore. Everybody agreed we needed TV.
NASA closes out the 60s by landing humans on the moon. Not once, but twice. The third attempt comes to be known as NASA's most